one of the things that we have to make sure we're looking out for is what are the patterns that the Bible is showing us, and where do we find ourselves in those patterns? Yesterday, when I met with a lot of entrepreneurs, we were on a call together, and it was so phenomenal because we're all coming together, and many of them have goals and dreams. And I mean, just name an industry, name a product or service, name a part of the country. People were coming together from all around the world. It was an amazing meeting. And when we all met together, one of the things that we started talking about, one of the first things that I presented to them is, before we start going down this road of, I'm trying to think what was the topic yesterday, how to turn your company, how to create a global brand. That's what it was about, by using God first principles. So I said, before we begin to dive heavily into the how-tos, because they're learning so many things from, growing their social media channels and, launching their podcasts and getting their products and service off the ground, getting their emails and things set up. I mean, there's just so many things. And then we have all these goals and things in place. Some people are looking to get up to a certain level. So we really roll up our sleeves and get to work with a lot of things that we do. But I said, and I bring this up to say, before we even begin with that, let's make sure that everyone has a clear understanding of biblical patterns. And I'm not going to walk through all of what we talked about, but I think it's so important to touch on this that I wanted to do a video for the general public to see. Is there are patterns in the Bible. The Bible really is just a series of patterns. Really, it is. I spent all day Saturday from morning until late at night just literally studying through the Old Testament and walking through the Kings, starting through with the Judges, right? And studying, Gideon and Deborah and all of the judges. I think there were about 12 or so judges. Then going through the Kings and then looking at each king. So, how about this? I want to challenge you to take your time, sit down, and then go through every king in the Bible. Every king that there were. Start with Saul, and you'll know the up and the down that he went through and why he went on that down slope. Then go into David, right? We all love David, right? But David did some mess as well, just so you know. David did some stuff and ended up getting a woman pregnant and did some things he had no business doing, a woman that was married. And then David had some issues in his family with his kids, and one of his sons tried to kill him. I mean, David went through some stuff. So, but just look at what happened with David, right? And then go on into who was next? Solomon. And I think that's kind of where we parked yesterday when I was in the meeting with a lot of the entrepreneurs. We talked a little bit about Solomon and about what went well and what didn't. Now, Solomon got it right at the end, and you guys know that Solomon wrote a lot of Proverbs and, of course, Ecclesiastes and Song of Songs. But we talked about, so what went wrong in that? And why is that even important to pay attention to, especially if we want to apply that to our personal development or even in business? It's so important to follow patterns. So what happened with Solomon's son, with Rehoboam, who came after him? Did he not learn from his dad what to do and what not to do? So let me just slow down a little bit, because we ended up talking for almost 2 hours yesterday. The meeting went like almost an hour over where it was supposed to go, because it was such a good discussion. And I love that everyone in the group was like, Z, this was so beyond phenomenal, because this has given us the foundation that we need as we're growing our companies or launching our businesses or whatever it is that we're doing, because we got to be aware of the pitfalls, because it's easy to worship and love God. I shouldn't say easy. That's not true. I should say it's a little easier to say when you don't have what you're aiming for yet, that, oh no, God's going to always be first in my life. I'm always going to do, honor the Lord and do what I need to do. And then God blesses you. He gives you what it is that you've been praying for, you've been asking for so long. And then you're not praying as much as you used to. You're not worshiping him the way you used to, right? And then before you know it, you're following these counterfeit gods or these idols, and it just kind of snuck up on you. So if you don't believe me, let's look at what happened with Solomon a little bit. So anyway, that's how I started off the entrepreneur mentorship that I had yesterday. And it was fantastic. They loved it. And it was only by the grace of God that everyone was really able to benefit from it, just to get a solid foundation. But whether you have a business or not, this should apply to you. You always want to be aware of what are the biblical principles and what are patterns in the Bible. What principle and what pattern am I following? And what do I need to be aware of so that I can at least be alarmed and make and pray to God and be alarmed and do my best to not fall into that same trap. So with Solomon, what was so interesting is in 1 Kings chapter 3, if you all turn to it real quick. I love that it starts off in verse 10. The Lord was pleased that Solomon had asked let me just go up a little higher. Solomon said, but I'm only a little child and I don't know how to carry out my duties. Your servant is here among the people you've chosen, a great people, too numerous to count or number. So give your servant a discerning heart to govern your people and to distinguish between right and wrong. For who's able to govern this great people of yours? And the Lord went on in verse 10, the Lord was pleased that Solomon had asked for this. So God said to him, since you've asked for this and not for long life or wealth for yourself, nor have you asked for the death of your enemies, but for discernment and administering justice, I'll do whatever you've asked. And then he goes on to say, I'm going to give you a wise, discerning heart, and so on and so on. So that's good. So what I did yesterday, and I'm just giving like a little piece of what we talked about. It was such a good discussion that we had, is, you kind of say, okay, so that's a high piece, right? Solomon's humble. He's going to God. He's getting advice. Then if you turn the page over to 1 Kings chapter 4 and you go into verse 29, it says God gave Solomon wisdom and very great insight and a breadth of understanding as measureless as the sand on the seashore. Well, that sounds good, right? Solomon's wisdom was greater than the wisdom of all the men of the East and greater than the wisdom of Egypt. He was wiser than any other man. And then it just goes on to talk about how wise he was, how much the Lord was so pleased with him, and Solomon was doing everything right. And then just go on a few more chapters. I'm not going to read through every page. I would love to, but I know for time's sake I can't. But if you go through every chapter and you get to chapter 11, I think it's chapter 11 here. Let me just see. Get to chapter 11 and then go look down to see what is some of this stuff that Solomon was doing. So then it goes on to talk about around verse 3, chapter 11, verse 3. Solomon said he had 700 wives of royal birth and 300 concubines, and his wives led him astray. So Solomon went out marrying all of these women from all over the place that was following all of these different gods, right? He was totally not doing what God told him to do. And in verse 4, as Solomon grew old, his wives turned his heart to other gods, and his heart was not fully devoted to the Lord, as the heart of his father, David, his father, had been. He allowed Ashtoreth, the goddess of the Sidonians, and Molech, the detestable god of the Amorites. He followed Ashtoreth, the god of the Sidonians, and Molech, the detestable god of the Amorites. So Solomon did evil in the eyes of the Lord. He did not follow the Lord completely as David, his father, had done. My goodness. And then it just goes on to talk about these different gods that he followed. And I won't go into detail about each of them because I'm going to shorten this a little bit. But the bottom line is that these gods, even like the god of Molech, these people were literally like sacrificing their kids to these gods. So you wonder, wait a minute, how is that even possible that your father is King David, you build this huge, immaculate kingdom. The Bible even teaches us in Ecclesiastes that Solomon didn't deny himself anything his eyes desired. And God is so pleased with you. And then you just go left field and you begin to come down off of this curve because now you're following all of these other gods. And how are you going to allow all these statues and things to be built and you're honoring and following all of these other gods? Even gods that were so detestable. So that's what happened. That's just that. So when you sit back and look at it, you just look at, wow, let's look at that pattern. What happens? How do we identify ourselves in that pattern? Where do I stand? First of all, do I recognize myself anywhere on this curve, right? And where do I see this story going? And then when you go on a little bit further, and I would just love to keep going with you guys, go on into the next one. Go into Jeroboam and Rehoboam, right? Jeroboam was not Solomon, not his son. It was Rehoboam. But then go into that and see what happens. So you would think that Rehoboam would kind of learn from his dad, right? And Solomon, again, he ended up getting it right at the end. I'm just kind of jumping through a few things. But then Rehoboam came along. And you think, okay, surely he's going to get it right? Because at this point, Rehoboam is now running, I think it was just Judah. So Rehoboam, here it goes again. Rehoboam, it says in verse 4, 1 Kings chapter 12, verse 4. Said, your father put a heavy yoke on us, but now lighten the harsh labor and the heavy yoke he put on us, and we'll serve you. Verse 6, then King Rehoboam consulted with the elders who had served his father Solomon during his lifetime. How would you advise me to answer these? So basically, the elders gave him some good advice. Instead of doing that, he followed some advice from his friends. From some of the younger people, and they basically told him to make things even harder for people. And I'm jumping around, and the bottom line is they end up revolting against him, and Rehoboam ended up pretty much, losing it all. He ended up pretty much just losing it all. The kingdom was divided at this point. You've got Rehoboam with, I think, one tribe, and then you have Jeroboam with about 10 or so, right? So the same thing is just like, what is this pattern or this? Why is there such an up and down with these different kings? And then you look at some of them, you look at like Hezekiah, one of my favorite, and you look at Josiah, and you look at, wow, there was not this big swing of an up and down with them. And you look at, well, what did they do? And the Bible teaches about how they continue to worship God. They continue to honor him. They continue to come against all of the detestable gods of the land. They continue to worship him daily, right? So that's why it's so important that when we sit back, and I have to do this myself, you guys, I have to sit back and look at what is the pattern that I'm following, and am I off track a little bit here? Am I off track? Sometimes we're asking God for things and we want him to bless us so badly, right? I've been there. And there's times when God, and I thank God that there's times in my life where he hid me from myself. He had to hide me from me, because what I thought I needed at that time, especially when it came to finances and things, I would have messed it all up. Many of you all know my story. I had my butt up in casinos and stuff, gambling and stuff, because I didn't know how to deal with the issues that I was going through in life. I didn't know how to deal with my marriage falling apart. I didn't know how to deal with in and out of the hospital almost every couple of days with my son. I didn't know how to deal with being a younger mother with 4 kids at that time, right? And finances were being, all over the place, and friends talking about me and this and that. And so I went to counterfeit gods, right? So that's why it's so important that I just want to encourage you all, no matter what it is that you're working hard to achieve, to attain whatever goal it is, make sure that you understand the biblical patterns so that you can at least be aware. And I had one person say yesterday, she's a phenomenal person. I won't go into detail because I respect privacy. She said, Z, when you very first opened up and said that you wanted to start with patterns and principles in the Bible, and we went through some good patterns as well. We went through Isaiah 60, Isaiah 61. What does it look like when the Lord shines his light up on you, right? Nations are going to be drawn to you, right? Your gates are always going to be open, right? People bringing riches from afar, right? And how the Lord is pleased. Like, we went through some really good principles and some other good patterns. I just kind of gave you a little bit of a shorter version. But she said, I'm so glad that we started with this. She said, because, in the first session that we had, I just really wanted to just talk about how to grow my company, how to make some money. Like, what do I need to do? And she said, but I don't want to go into all the details, but I love that she was so humbled and so appreciative that, wow, we're building a solid foundation here, which is so needed. This is what's needed, is the foundation. Let's make sure we know what principles we're going to be applying in our lives. And I'm talking, you don't have to be an entrepreneur to take this. Whether you're an entrepreneur and you're trying to get a business off the ground, or you're trying to grow a global brand, which is kind of the focus of that group that I'm leading with them. And I'm so proud of them and all the changes they're making and the things that they're doing. Or whether it's just in your personal life, right? You're just trying to grow closer to God than you've ever been in your life. No matter what it is, we got to make sure that we know what is the pattern that we're following. One of the things I told them is, I said, find out what the Bible says about you. Where do you fall in the Bible? Go any place you want to go in here. What story is speaking to you? And now let's identify, what is that pattern in that story? You guys know mine. We've talked quite a bit about Isaiah 60. That speaks to me. Isaiah 60. I remember, I shouldn't say the first time I read it, but I remember one of the recent times I read it, and I thought, oh my goodness, Isaiah 60 and Isaiah 61. Isaiah 61 is the year of the Lord's favor. And it's talking about the Spirit of the Sovereign Lord is on me, because the Lord has anointed me to preach good news to the poor. He sent me to bind up the brokenhearted. And poor doesn't mean necessarily poor in finances. It can be poor in spirit, by the way. So I'm not necessarily saying that it's just people who are poor who don't have anything. I mean poor in spirit. They're grieving and longing for more, right? But he sent me to bind up the brokenhearted, to proclaim freedom for the captives and release from darkness, for the prisoners and so on. That speaks to me. So I study that out quite a bit to understand. So what becomes of this? What is the what principle is in this, and what pattern is in this that I'm following? And then it goes on to talk about what becomes of it. You will be called priests of the Lord. You will be named ministers of our God. You will feed on the wealth of nations, and in their riches you will boast. Instead of their shame, you will receive a double portion instead of disgrace. So that's where you look and you say, what is the principle and what is the pattern that I'm following? Hopefully this is making sense what I'm saying to you all. When you turn over to Isaiah 60, and I'm talking much faster. This almost is a 2-hour conversation that I'm kind of putting in a 15, 20-minute post. But I just wanted to get this out because I believe this can help some people. But even when you look at Isaiah 60, the glory of Zion, and it just talks about, arise, shine, for your light has come, and the glory of the Lord rises up on you. Remember, when you're reading the scriptures, we read it for what it is. We understand the relevance and what was going on at that time. Who were they speaking to? That's a whole nother subject I wish I can go into. Who were they speaking to? Then we have to take another step back and say, God, what are the mysteries in this? What is it that you're showing me? What's the principle in this that I can take away? When the glory of the Lord rises and shines up on you, oh, that's interesting. Nations will come to your light, and kings to the brightness of your rising. That's interesting. Then it goes on to say, you will look and be radiant. Your heart will swell with joy. The wealth of the seas will be brought to you. To you, the riches of the nations will come. There's so much more you can draw from it. And then when you're basing your life, when you're basing the decisions you're making on, okay, this is the pattern in the Bible that I see, and this is the principles that I'm putting I don't want to say putting my life on, but a principle is like a fundamental truth. It's almost like the foundation of my belief. But this is what I'm basing my belief on, because I'm following a principle in the Bible. Well, when you follow a pattern, or you can identify the different principles in the Bible, then it's almost as if, and I don't want to say it like this, but it's almost as if you have nothing to worry about, because you already know what the end results are going to be, because God cannot lie. So when you look at a passage like Psalm 1, which I just love, right? Blessed is the man who does not walk in the counsel of the wicked, or stand in the way of sinners, or sit in the seat of mockers. Hold on. But his delight is in the law of the Lord, and on his law he meditates day and night. So what happens to a man that, a person, I should say, that delights in the law of the Lord and meditates day and night? What's the principle behind that I can pick up on? Oh, the Bible is teaching me he's like a tree planted by streams of water, which yields its fruit in season, and whose leaf does not wither. Whatever he does prospers. How is that possible that whatever he does prospers? Because he's continuing to meditate on the law of the Lord, and God is not going to allow him to be led astray. And even in his mistakes, God is able to make crooked roads straight. So you find a principle that you want to stand on, and you're like, you know what? And a principle is almost like if this, then that. So you look at, wow, Lord, teach me how to meditate on it and be delighted in your law day and night. That's why it's so important, you all. Study the biblical patterns. Understand that the Bible is a series of patterns. All through the Bible, it's nothing but patterns, which I love it. Identify and see, where do I stand in this? Okay, I'm trying to grow a business, right? Where do I stand in this? And what do I need to be aware of as this thing is taking off, or as I'm trying to focus on getting this off the ground? Or I'm trying to grow closer in my walk with God. How do I build greater capacity in the spirit in my prayer life? What is it I need to be doing, God? I want to draw closer to you. Look at the patterns, and then identify some of those principles in the Bible that you can stand on as a fundamental truth that, wait a minute, the Bible teaches us, blessed is the man that meditates day and night on the law of the Lord. Okay, that's a lot of meditating. That's a lot of, okay, but how is it that everything he does prospers? I know the Bible can't lie. And then you dive deeper into some of these principles. Go over to read about the story of that Jesus told about the talent. There's so many patterns and principles all through the Bible. You just soak in it. Identify, where do you stand? Where do you stand in that? Where do you stand? Sit back and meditate on that and pray on that, and ask God to uncover your eyes and show you, God, what is it that you have for me in my life, right? What is it I can learn from this particular pattern you're showing me, right? And God, what are the principles that you want me to stand up on? Anyway, I love you all. I pray that you've been encouraged. I love you. Bye-bye.